think we can go ahead and get started. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We being DB Services, part of the FM Academy, we're going to be putting on a class titled FileMaker Security, Protecting Your Data. I'm the instructor. My name is Michael Westendorf, and hopefully everybody can hear me and see me today. Let us get started. The FM Academy is a consortium of leading FileMaker development companies in the United States. We bring you monthly training seminars for free. All slides and materials will be posted on the FM Academy website shortly after the presentation, along with a recording of the video. A little bit about me. I am the Senior Application Developer here at DB Services. I am certified in FileMaker 12 and 13. I've been developing in FileMaker for over a decade now. I started straight out of college using FileMaker 6 with server version 5.5, and I've used every version since. A little bit about DB Services here. We're sponsors of the FileMaker Developer Conference. I hope everyone's going to attend this year. We have a global presence. We have customers in Canada, Europe, Asia, pretty much all over the globe. We are a team focused on adding value to your company. And if you want to find out more, you can check out our website, dbservices.com. Questions. Along the way, if you guys have any questions, please type them into the question box. Time permitting, I will answer as many as possible. I want to make sure we get to the material before going to the questions. If we don't get to your question, please send it to fba@dbservices.com. The overview. So security is a big hot topic in the IT world today. Everyone has heard the stories of companies, Anthem, Target, and the data breaches that have occurred. Today we're going to look at how you can protect your FileMaker files, best practices for deploying server, basic techniques, industry trends, and we'll provide you a checklist at the end on how to secure your application. I do feel it's important to point out that not all of these items we're going to go through are required, nor are they always deployed together as I'm kind of presenting them. The presentation is meant as an overview of different techniques and methods you may choose to use when deploying your applications. To me, finding a comfort level that best suits your organization and implementing security policy for your company is probably the best thing you could do, because then you can make sure you can live with that and maintain it throughout your development. So let's get started. Ways to protect your FileMaker file. The first thing I usually do is disable the generic admin full access account. Now, when I say disable, you can turn it off, you can delete it from the account. This isn't to say that you can't have a full access account in the system. I just believe that the admin account is too generic, and by default, a new file will not have any account in it at all. I cannot see the PowerPoint. Awesome. Screen 2. It looks like the PowerPoint may not be showing. So, enabling, the next thing to talk about would be the admin account, and you can disable the admin account through full access. Disabling the full access account through the developer tools will actually allow you to remove it completely from the system so that no one has a full access account. This is best done in runtime solutions that are deployed, or vertical solutions where you have a method for extracting the data out of the system another way. The best thing to do is to use a full access account, because you'll have to make changes to the system at some point. Setting a minimum version in file options is a feature that's available in 13. Setting the minimum version just ensures that everyone using the system is using the system as you intended it to be used. New with FileMaker 14, you can disable storing credentials in Keychain or the credential store. FileMaker 14 allows Windows users and FileMaker Go users to save your credentials automatically so that when you open the file, you don't have to put them in again, which is a really nice feature. However, it does potentially pose a security threat. So if you so choose, you can disable it both on Mac and Windows. Using external authentication, we'll get into some more details later about that, as well as enabling encryption at rest. Apparently, don't know why this isn't showing. Let's try this a different way. So I apologize for this, but no one can seem to see the PowerPoint. Let's try that. Although I can't see your questions. We will go through this, and hopefully that took care of it. When to use external authentication. So this is a list of reasons when you would use it in your system. Your organization already uses Active Directory, Open Directory. You're essentially halfway there if you already have those things in place. Your FileMaker files will be accessed by other files in a multi-file solution. I've dealt with many existing systems who have, 10, 20, 30, all the way up to 70 or 100 files, and managing users in all the files can be a headache if you change employees or need to make password changes. Using Active Directory or single sign-on can circumvent this by putting security groups inside the individual files once and then managing the users in the Active Directory. Your organization may already enforce minimum password standards if you have an IT department or a security policy in place. Moving the account management to Active Directory will allow you to maintain these requirements. It is possible for someone to replicate your security group and gain access to the data, and we'll talk about ways to prevent that here shortly. One slide I put in here that I thought was interesting. The password length really does matter. This was taken off a blog I like to read. I've got a link to it at the end. Essentially, using a random password generator and then a second online tool, you can determine how long it would take to brute force attack your password and get it right. Starting with 8 characters, it only takes them 2 seconds, where going up to 12 characters will increase that time to a year. Now, adding a special characters into it instead of just uppercase, lowercase, and numbers, you can see how the 8 characters is still pretty much useless. It only takes a minute. However, the 12 characters with special characters, including exclamation points, those kinds of things, would take them 2 centuries to hack. FileMaker added file level encryption with version 13. FileMaker encrypts everything at the block level using AES 256. This encrypts the entire file. It secures the file against domain replication. Essentially, if you're using single sign-on, it is possible for someone to take a copy of your file, create an entire second domain off-site. So they set up a new server, they set up a new domain controller with Active Directory, and they could put in your security groups and gain access to the file without ever having to know the password, because they can add the user through Active Directory. Small chance of happening, but there is the threat. Encrypting your file removes that threat, because once they take the copy of the file, they can no longer get into the file itself. They have to put in a password, an encryption password that you determined ahead of time before they can host it on the new server. Encrypting the file also prevents the file from being cracked with third-party tools. There are tools on the market today that you can take a FileMaker file, pass it through the tool, and it will crack all the passwords, essentially removing them. And then it's just a matter of logging in with any of those accounts, as the screenshot on the right shows. Encrypting it, though, will make it so you cannot use those tools. You would have to have the encryption password to get in. And then I'd just like to point out that data stored in temp files, temp caches, the backups themselves are also encrypted by FileMaker. So you don't have to worry about the backups. Let's keep moving on. Ways to protect your file. This is a screenshot of the managed privilege sets within managed security. We will do a little demo here in a little bit, but I'm going to go through this. It's broken out into 3 sections. You have the data access and design, the extended privileges, and the other privileges. The data access and design is what this slide focuses on. We have the records where you can view, edit, create, delete records. We have the individual fields and the access to some calc engine. And what that means is having access to the FM calc engine means you can define a calc and specify which records people can view, edit, create, or delete. So let's say, for example, you had an onboarding process with potential customers, and certain members of your sales team should only see records that they have access to. Maybe you have a manager assigning them access. You can use, say, the get account name function to limit access to the records that they can see or edit or create or delete. Creating records is limited in the same way, but you could also just turn it off. Within the records section, you can also limit their access to individual fields within the table. Maybe you have an order table and one of the fields in there is the profit, and you just basically want to say only managers have access to the profit number. The layouts themselves, it works in a similar fashion. You don't have access to the calc engine, but you can control who can view, edit existing layouts based on their privilege sets, limit creation of new layouts, disable record access on a layout. So maybe they have access to the order data and the order table, but on a specific layout, you don't want them to be able to access any of the records. You can turn off record access by the layout. The value lists themselves, so the value lists are what populate drop-down lists and other interface items in FileMaker. The value list, you can limit who can view or edit existing value lists, and you can limit creating new ones. Scripts, you can limit who can execute or edit a script, essentially creating or modifying a script, and you can limit essentially just creating new ones. So scripts, the big thing there is who can execute certain scripts. This is a slide that basically details how FileMaker processes your requests. So on the left, starting at the top, you have a user who attempts to view a layout. The layout privileges through the layout access will first determine if they can see the layout itself. If they can, then the data access via that layout is rolled out. And then it moves on to the record privilege set. Table records and record access are determined, and eventually it'll get down to whether or not they can see individual fields within a table or record. To me, this is an important way of visualizing the fact that layout interface level security, in other words, you're making your navigation the security, you're clicking on buttons to navigate to separate areas in your system, and maybe inside your script you're saying, you know, if the account name equals manager, take them to this layout, otherwise don't let them in. This can be circumvented fairly easily if you have the server turned on to allow web access or ODBC access or through other scripts. And that is the right half of the chart here. You can see that it completely bypasses the layout privileges. And the only thing I'd like to point out is the only true way to 100% protect your data is to use record level security or record privileges. Let's complete this by talking about the extended privileges. The extended privileges essentially let you limit how your file is accessed, whether it's accessed through the network, WebDirect, ODBC, XML, or PHP. It's all about how they're getting at it. You can also create extended or custom extended privileges. An example of this would be if you're using the security, you have a user group who wants to be able to access like a reporting system. You could create a custom one that says, you know, access to reporting system, and then within your scripts you could determine which security group they're in, and just kind of as a flag to see if they can get in there. And finally, the other privileges, essentially this controls everything else. Who can do the printing, who can do the exporting, who can manage extended privileges, allow users to override data, validation warnings. Those data validation warnings would be like field level validation. If you're essentially saying that a field is required, are they allowed to override any of them? Do you want this group of users to be disconnected when they sit idle? This is important because no matter how much security you put in place, if a user logs into their terminal, opens up FileMaker, and then walks away, it's always possible for another user to just walk over to their terminal and start using the system as if they were that user. Disconnecting them on idle, you'd have to fit this with your corporate IT policy so that they get disconnected, maybe after 10 minutes or 2 hours. It really depends. You can decide whether or not users should be allowed to modify their password. You can set password requirements. Or limit menu commands. And again, FileMaker's password requirements are simply how often it has to be changed and the length. Okay, let's jump into the computer here. I gotta exit this presentation. And I apologize for the PowerPoint not working. I'm not sure what happened, but it looks like it's good now. So let's look at the main screen. The security demo here. This is just a file they threw together. Essentially, it has 3 areas: employees, products, and orders. Right now, through just a simple button click, I cannot get to the orders because of the way, and this is just an example of something that I've seen done in other places. There's a global variable being set that simply sets a number. Anything less than 3 can get into orders, and anything bigger than 3 can't. It's just a common technique I've seen, not one I usually use myself. But the buttons down below will show you what the screen looks like with full access, data entry, read-only, or no access. Now, the first 3 are the default FileMaker privilege sets. You have full access, data entry, and read-only. The last one is a custom one we made called no access. Essentially, they have no access to anywhere in the system. I made the layouts visible because otherwise it'd be really hard to demonstrate. So as you can see, this is the managed security. I would like to point out that FileMaker 14 added the basic tab. It's warning me because the admin account has no password, but for my demo file, I didn't put one in. I'm a big fan of this in 14. I think it will help a lot of non-developer, non-techie people be able to come in here and not get overwhelmed and be able to edit and modify accounts easily. But the privilege sets, you have the extended privilege and you have the file access. The file access essentially lets you limit which other files can access the data inside your file. So if you check the require access box, if you tried to open a brand new file, link it to this file, and then insert some of the data from this file into yours, it would force you to log in as a full access user to authenticate the 2 files together. That authentication process is valid from anytime you copy the file or clone it or back it up. It keeps a persistent ID, it's called, for each file. FileMaker does. You can reset that persistent ID if you wanted to reforce people to log in again using the developer tools in FileMaker Pro Advanced. Let's keep taking a look at this one. So one thing I'd just like to point out, as you notice, we scroll through our user sets here. If I jump over to the no access, this is what FileMaker does if you have no access to something. So if you were to implement a policy where only certain people could see their accounts, everyone else would see just no access. It's not the most visually pleasing, but it does work. One thing that is later in the slide deck, but I wanted to go ahead and demonstrate it, is plugins. Now, we use plugins pretty much every day here at DB Services. However, there is a potential for a security threat, so I'm going to show you a little demo here. Let's jump over to the other screen. I have essentially the same file open, only this one has an order table that I couldn't get to, that I still can't get to, but I'm showing it anyways on the screen. So let's say I was a data entry user, a normal user in FileMaker. I actually can't get to this layout because the security is done at the interface level. However, the big thing comes down to if people are running advanced. If they're running advanced and they wanted to be malicious, or they wanted to just have some fun, they could poke around in here. You could look at the get functions, and you could say, sorry, not get, design functions, script names, and there's a list of all the scripts in our system. You say, okay, so what? So I have a list of my scripts, and there's plugins out there. The particular one that we are a big fan is the Base Elements plugin. It's free. Any user could put it installed on their machine, but it has a function to execute script. So now I can take my script, I can plug it into here, my Bobby table script, and I can evaluate it. Well, what exactly did that script do? We go back and look at our order table where we had 15 records. Now we have 0. And the point of this is, if someone wanted to be, if they had a copy advance and they wanted to be malicious or try to hack things, it's fairly simple to do so if they knew how to do it. The script names you'll see common in existing systems, especially older existing systems that have multiple files. Sometimes you'll see a modular script called delete all records. Well, if someone saw that script in there and they wanted to, they could run that script and they could delete all the records in whatever table they're in or whatever screen they're on. So they're real life things that could happen. Whether they've actually happened, not with any of the customers I've worked with. That's it for that demo. Let's get back over here to the slides. Here we're going to be talking about some of the just general best practices. When FileMaker does the encryption, it's encrypting the entire file. What that means is that you can't encrypt individual fields. If you have sensitive information in your system, such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, student IDs, if you're a university, this information is considered sensitive. You can encrypt that using, actually, there's an article we have on our website at the field level through the use of plugins. The Base Elements plugin will actually do this for you. And what you're doing is you're encrypting it so that, you know, if someone had access to your data, they would have to have the encryption key to make any sense out of the data inside individual fields. Limiting plugins. What do I mean by that is there's a FileMaker function. It's called get installed FM plugins. And what you can do is you can write a startup script. Inside your startup script, you can say, well, here's a list of all the plugins the person has installed on their machine. Maybe I don't want them to use, you know, plugin XYZ. So if they have XYZ installed, I'm not going to let them get into my system. I'm just going to exit the system. Now, I better point out, most of these things, there's a situation where none of these things can really be prevented. If someone has a full access account and FileMaker Pro Advanced, I mean, that's kind of like they have access to your system anyways. There's really nothing you can do other than try to keep them from having both if you don't want them to. A full access account and a FileMaker Pro Advanced can essentially bypass the startup script, so anything you've built in custom is going to be able to get overridden. The second thing on here is prevent unwanted access from Advanced data viewer. That's essentially what I was getting after. If you prevent them from installing FileMaker Pro Advanced or don't let it on your network, you know, except for authorized developers, they can't have access to the data viewer. That's essentially pretty much all you can do from that regard, other than keeping the number of FileMaker full access accounts to a minimum. Make use of guard clauses. Guard clauses is what we call things that are preventing scripts from executing. Essentially, a guard clause is just a chunk of code, usually an if statement, at the beginning of your script that will not allow the script to perform the action unless a certain condition is met. A perfect example would be if a plugin is calling the script like we just did, you could put a guard clause, and I've never actually done this, but you could. You could put a guard clause at the top of every one of your scripts that is looking for a specific phrase, or it could be a UUID based on the file, that has to be passed along as a parameter. If it's passed along as a parameter, then the script will execute. If it's not, the script will not execute. So when the plugin is trying to circumvent your system and run a script, it doesn't pass the parameter and the script won't execute. I'm a big fan of disabling unnecessary layout modes, especially table view. It's just table view doesn't play as well on the interface level, so it's harder to build things to keep people out of areas. You know, it shows all the records in front of somebody. It also allows you to see fields that aren't necessarily on the layout. So you could have a layout and only show a, you know, the order number, the shipping location, and the sale price. But inside the table, there's the profit, the cost, everything else. Table view will essentially allow a user to just show whatever fields they want and look at any data they want, unless you've set it at the privilege set level in the records. Don't use global variables as security flags. Again, anyone with FileMaker Pro Advanced, like I did, they can change a global variable through the data viewer. So if they were wanting to, they could change their access level. Now, admittedly, they would have to know what to change and what name to change and how to do it, but it is possible. Okay, so something that is very common in the industry, we do it as well, you roll your own custom account management. So you don't make use of the FileMaker security settings, but you roll your own. I've listed just a few things here that are kind of like could get you into trouble. Awareness of find behavior. FileMaker find, you should always use a double equal and quote the value that you're trying to find. So a common thing is to have a startup script, you take the person's account name when they log in, and you make sure that they're an employee or user inside a table in your system. Well, you need to make sure you're looking for the exact match and not a partial match. Snapshot links are another thing to be wary of. You can disable their use. So let's say, for instance, if you're only using interface level security, like the example we're talking about here, and a manager runs a report that their employee isn't supposed to see, they technically can't get to that area of the system in FileMaker, but the manager gave them a snapshot link that showed the report. If the snapshot link gets passed around, anyone who has an account will be able to run that file, and it will open up and take them to the layout with the set of data on their report. That's just standard FileMaker behavior. Again, you can circumvent that by having privilege sets with record level and layout level access. But if you're rolling your own custom account management, it's a little harder to get around. And again, using guard clauses would prevent some of this. If you could create a custom no access privilege set, so when the system first opens, they have no access, and then you grant them access as they move along. Essentially, the no access is just more restrictive than the default read-only one. I'm going to show you another demo here that's using some web code. A common thing to do in the web is to authenticate a user before and then pass them back results through a login system. So I have to reset this, but I have 3 files here. They're essentially the same code, just one's demo 2, one's demo 3. If I log in as test, I get 1 record back, and I'm doing my find by doing a double equal test, double equal user. Seems well enough. However, if I do asterisk, and those of you familiar with FileMaker may know that the asterisk in FileMaker terms means find all or return all. We will do our login again. Should hit the button first because this is going to take a little minute. Essentially, in this demo file, it is doing a find and is finding all records. So it's going to return all the records. So all the records that are in this temp file in our server got returned. Now, one way to prevent this is to use, let's try that again. So I do the asterisk asterisk, and it gave me an error saying no records match. Now, if you were deploying this in the real world, you wouldn't say no records match. You would trap for that error and say, you know, your account credentials are invalid. But you'll see above the difference between this find, where I just did equals equals, and this find, I actually put them in quotes. So quotes is escaping the default special behavior of the asterisk and making it look for the actual asterisk inside the field and not do a find all. Both of these are using a method where you're authenticating to the file with a generic web user account, and then you're letting them do a search, and you have your own employee or web login or customer portal account inside the system. The third method actually makes use of FileMaker's own managed security and accounts. So you'd have to make an account for every person. To do that in here, you know, so if I did test again, the same account, you know, I get a standard FileMaker error. This can be due to invalid username or password, which is actually the case. If I log in with the web user account, spell it right, I was able to log in. Now this person has no record, so it didn't show any, but I was able to log in. And real briefly, we'll touch on that. So the first two are logging in with a generic web user account, and then once you're in the system, it's doing a find to authenticate you versus a user table, so to speak. The third one actually passes what you passed through the username and password directly to the FileMaker call that you're sending to the server saying, here's my username and password, go make sure I'm a valid user in the account settings and manage security. So the third one is probably most secure, but leaves the least amount of flexibility to allow users to, you know, manage this themselves. Do this again. Let's touch on FileMaker Server specifically. With FileMaker Server, you have some options. You can, well, let's just say options. Let's start with this. You should always remove the sample file in versions 13 and before. You should remove it always, but 14 did improve on this. Removing the sample file, you're taking away a security hole where if you're hosting a file on your server, anyone could access the sample file because by default, the sample file has a admin account with no password that is full access. Now you may say, who cares? It's just a sample file. But I have seen people before where they have essentially, if the server is configured in a certain way and you can install plugins, you can install a plugin through the sample file to the server, and then use that plugin to get a list and access any of the files on the server, not just the FileMaker files, the entire server directory, because the plugins have that ability to say, well, give me all the files on the C drive. Well, delete all the files on the C drive. So the threat is there. There's really no reason to have it on your server. Just take it off. In FileMaker 14, they actually password protected it, so it's a little better. If you forget to take it off, it's not as big of a deal, but there's really very little use for it. Hiding individual files that are hosted on the server. You can hide files from showing up under the Open Remote dialog, or in version 14, the new Launch Center, so they won't show up there. Hiding files just prevents prying eyes, the way I look at it. It prevents people from easily guessing the file name and then trying to brute force their way in. You can always, if you know the file name, you can always just type it in directly and open the file. But it is a kind of like a first level of security. Listing only databases each user is authorized to access. When you try to open a server and you have this option checked, you will be prompted to enter your credentials. You can't see any of the files until you put in your credentials. Once you put in your credentials, it'll only show you files you have access to. So if you had 100 files on your server and you know a standard user only sees 20 of them, they'd only get 20, only has accounts in 20, they'd get 20 files shown. Enabling SSL. SSL is, I think, very important. If you're sending your data over the WAN or over the internet, it encrypts your data. Without SSL turned on, anyone with a tool like Wireshark, and who knows what they're doing, they can just sit there, monitor the traffic coming over port 5003, and essentially read the data being passed back and forth. I do want to point out, when you're using SSL, you should use a custom certificate, not the standard FileMaker certificate, because it's really just for development testing. A custom one is what you need to do. Enable HTTPS for progressive downloads. This is a FileMaker Server 14 feature. Previously, with SSL turned on with a custom certificate or standard, you could only download files on Go or WebDirect progressively if they were sent unencrypted. Now with FileMaker 14, you can progressively download them securely, and they will use a custom, but it requires a custom certificate. Use non-standard ports. It's another new feature in 14. This is debatable, but I can tell you from experience. I used to manage a print company, and their IT, the #1 attack was just people coming in through FTP and just bombarding port 25, the standard FTP port, just trying to account after account after account after account. Using non-standard ports is just a way to try to prevent that. And by ports, I mean port 80 or 443 that FileMaker is using to host web files. More things to do on the server. Unless you need to, you can disable the plugin installation via script steps so that plugins cannot be automatically uploaded to your server and installed. Restrict access to the admin console by IP address. This will prevent people from, I mean, they won't even be able to access your admin console, so there would be no way for them to try to guess your password or log in. Disable technology is not needed. So if you remember the chart, these types of technologies can circumvent the layout access. So if you're not going to use them, don't install them or leave them off by default. XML, PHP, ODBC, these are all ways that people could access your data through the server directly. And enabling the client timeout. As I mentioned before, coming up with a policy internally on how long a user should be able to sit idle before being kicked out, just to try to prevent, you know, the prying eyes or the other person walking over to their terminal and acting like they were them. Okay. Some general things to discuss here. Interface level security in FileMaker is not real security. I mean, it's just not. Now, we build systems this way. I think just about everyone else out there does it as well. But you could still do exports. You could still use the table view, the data viewer. You know, I've shown you ways you can get around it. I would say if you had to be 100% certain, you would have to do it through managed security and the privilege sets. If you're building any web forms, it's always important to sanitize all of the data you're collecting or pushing to your server. Not so much in the FileMaker world, but in SQL and MySQL, those kinds of things, people will oftentimes try to inject code into your forms to get it to run on your server and do something malicious. Encrypt your hard disk drives. So you can encrypt the FileMaker file, but it's also good practice to encrypt your hard disk drive itself. The hard disk, that way if your computer's ever stolen and someone tries to take the hard disk drive out and put it in another machine, they'll have to have the encryption password to get in access to it. Review your server logs for potential attacks. Essentially, as I was mentioning, block unwanted IPs when I was basically sitting there and I kept seeing people attacking, you know, port 20, I'm sorry, 25 SMP, but attacking the FTP server. We would just block IPs, and eventually, you know, we got smarter and changed it to a non-standard port. Sending sensitive information via encrypted emails. So internally, what we do, if we're sending you account information, usernames, passwords, even sometimes external IP addresses, you can use tools like Virtru, which plugs into Chrome or Gmail. And then essentially, it's just at a click of a button, you can send someone an encrypted email so their data is secure. Industry's trends. These are things that we're seeing more and more. Enhanced use of encryption, resistance to cloud technology. I know everybody loves the cloud, but we're getting phone calls almost, you know, weekly or daily of people trying to essentially say they don't feel safe in the cloud. Who has access to my data? I want to run something internally. When FileMaker is actually really good at that as well anyways. We're running a project now where the company, basically mandated we'll do an application penetration testing. This is something, we didn't really see 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Security wasn't that hot of a topic. The mobile security, of course, is becoming important. And two-step authentication, that one's actually my favorite. So with two-step authentication, what you're doing is you're going through a two-step process to authenticate. I know I have this turned on for all my accounts, Gmail, Facebook, iCloud, all of them that basically enable it, Dropbox box. You go to the website, you log in. After you log in, you have to put in usually a 6-digit number that changes based on the time of day. And you can get an app on your phone for like Gmail that'll tell you the code, or they set up that they will text you the code after you put in your password successfully, and then you have to log in with the second piece of information. I just kind of wanted to throw out there the application penetration testing that I mentioned. It can get pretty in-depth. I mean, you can go through input validation, buffer overflow, cross-site scripting, URL manipulation, SQL injection, which doesn't really apply to FileMaker, but there are ways to do what we've termed like, FileMaker injection, FM injection, essentially putting the asterisk into the find on that web page is the same thing. Cookie modification. I mean, these are all things that we're being asked as consultants today to, be aware of and be able to pass tests on. So I've got a checklist here that essentially highlights most of the topics we've covered. This will be made available. I'm not going to go through all of it, except for the bottom part, because something we haven't talked about. Keep FileMaker up to date for latest security patches. That's important. You should always stay on the latest versions when possible. Use guard. And then the other thing another new feature in 14 that somehow didn't make my list, you can turn off, well, not in that file. You can turn off the ability to save a default username and password credentials now in 14, which needs to get out of that list, and I will. Sure. My PowerPoint. Oh. Some resources that we used in making this: the FileMaker Security Guide, an exploit-based approach to providing FileMaker platform security by Stephen Blackwell. I'm sure some of you listening have heard of Stephen Blackwell, very, very popular and influential in the community. The FileMaker Talk podcast, I love listening to those. Episode 103 was on security. And then the blog I mentioned that had your password is too damn short. Coding Horror. That's a pretty popular blog inside of our company here. The guy's a pretty good writer. And we are getting low on time. Just to recap, there's a lot of ways you guys can stay in touch with us here at DB Services. You can reach out to us via our website, email, fba@dbservices.com, our Twitter account @dbservices, or follow us on Facebook. We will get to the questions now. Let's see how many of these. Okay. That works. This is not. Are there instructions for integrating your database to Active Directory? I don't have any written. I actually have an article on our website for integrating with Open Directory because it was less common. I'm sure there's blog posts out there. I can essentially give you a quick overview. However, integrate with Active Directory. So this first, let's assume that the system is set up with Active Directory. Essentially, I mean, you have to have groups. All it comes down to is groups. You have groups of users in Active Directory, and your IT manager could help you give you the group names. You can give him group names and say these people need to go in there. Once you have the group names, and we switch to the basic setup because it's easier to look at, all that would be a matter of doing is adding a new account, saying external server, and then your group name just goes right here. Now, the FileMaker server has to be on the same domain as the domain controller, and there's other little, but essentially, as long as you're on the same domain and the FileMaker server knows where the domain controller is, you just have to put this in here. So maybe the group name is FM users on the domain controller, and they're going to get data entry access. That's literally the end of the FileMaker configuration. Pretty much that short. The other question here is, are we getting the slide deck? Yes, the slide deck and the slide deck will get posted, and as well as the video for you guys to reference. And that is all the questions we saw. So show the server. Can you show the server setup to be on the same domain for Open Directory? I think you're asking to see how to make sure the computer's on the domain as Active Directory. All that means is the server itself needs to be within the same network so that the server is a user. I can't show it because I don't actually have a domain controller here. The system itself, the domain controller itself sits on the network. Inside there, you have the domain controller manages both the computers, the servers, and the users and the groups, of course. The FileMaker computer just has to be a computer inside the Active Directory and listed as a server. So that way, if you log into the FileMaker server, you could log into the domain. That's essentially all you need to make sure you can do. So unfortunately, no, I can't show it, but there you go. Which firms can be hired to try to attack the solution? The projects we've done have actually, the customers themselves have their own internal IT departments, and it's the IT departments that are handling the penetration testing, kind of separating us from them. So I don't actually have a list of companies, but I'm sure we could find some on Google if we tried. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then here we go. So when will the file be uploaded? I mean, probably sometime today or tomorrow at the latest. Group policy. Will group policy or Windows security hamper anything within the database? I have not run any issues like that, so I would have to say no. Oh, okay, so which one is more secure, setting up local users in the FileMaker file or using Active Directory? It's a tough one to answer because using Active Directory or Open Directory allows you the possibility to enforce password guidelines. It gives you a single place to manage accounts. If someone leaves the company in a bad way, you can go to one place and remove their account versus two. Especially larger companies, you know, if the person left and the IT department removed it. So it's more secure from the aspect they're all managed in one area. You have more power over minimum requirements. I would say if you encrypt your file, Active Directory is more secure because encrypting it takes away the ability for someone to, you know, copy your file and clone it or take it somewhere and get access to your data by replicating your domain. Yes, the video will also be posted on the FM Academy website. The video, the slides will both be posted, and the checklist will be posted. Okay, so will changing the domain name affect the domain users logging into FileMaker? No more or no less than changing the domain would affect logging into the Windows computer. So I guess I didn't really mention that. When you log into the Windows terminal, if you're using Active Directory, your login credentials get passed to the FileMaker server from Windows to the FileMaker server, which checks the Active Directory to see if you're a valid user. So if you change your domain, yes, it would affect it, but only in the sense that you would have to add all the computers to the new domain, but you're going to be doing that anyways. So as long as the new domain had the same security group, it wouldn't be any different. Is record/field level access the only way to prevent people viewing data via the data viewer if they have Pro Advanced, assuming they do not have full access? So if they have advanced and not full access, yes. Once you have advanced and even a read-only account, or a data entry account, I should say, I mean, you have access to the data viewer. I mean, that is how it is. So if you have people with advanced and you don't want them seeing the data through the data viewer, acknowledge the privilege sets are the only way. Do you have a good suggestion for managing FileMaker security across related files? The only one, okay, so there's two ways to do it. One, you use local FileMaker accounts, and you build or have someone build for you a way to manage those accounts across all the files. So you can actually manage the accounts through scripting. My personal choice, though, is to use Active Directory, or External Authentication is a better way to say it. You don't actually have to have a domain controller. You can use External Authentication to set up a group inside the server machine itself. Because then you can put those groups inside all the files one time, as I mentioned before. So I guess those are your two options. I'm a beginner to setting up security access to my FileMaker files. Can you recommend a manual for beginners like me? Yes, I always recommend the FTS, the FileMaker Training Series. I believe the advanced one that you could purchase goes into security in a lot more detail than the basic one that's free. I would always start there. How secure custom menus? If done right, they can be pretty secure, because you can essentially limit access to, it's an interface level thing, so you can limit access through custom menus. Someone with an advanced, of course, can get around custom menus very, very easily. So again, you're limited to that if they have advanced, clause. But if you do custom menus right and you apply them to all the layouts, it's an interface level, so that if they were using ODBC or the web, of course, they're bypassing your custom menus. But in general, they're pretty rock solid if you understand the concept that they're on the interface. Is there a way to secure a solution through license keys to prevent sharing solution file? I'm assuming you're referring to like a vertical solution or something deployed as a runtime. Well, not a runtime, but something that you're selling off the shelf in a way. Not sure I understand the question. I'm going to move on for a second. Oh, yes, I kind of mentioned a group inside the server machine itself. Yes, a local group inside the managed window, the managed users and groups inside the Windows. If you're running a Windows server, FileMaker will look there instead of the Active Directory. So you can put the group right inside there, and you'll have to add all the users, of course. So if you've got if you have an Active Directory set up, use it first. If you don't, you can add all the user accounts to the FileMaker server itself, then create a group inside there, put them in there, and put the group inside the file like I showed you, and that'll work. Okay. This is the only one that we didn't answer. Going back to is there a way to secure a solution through license keys prevents sharing a solution file? So I'm going to try to answer this the way I think you're going for. If you're deploying a vertical solution, so you're selling, software in mass to off-the-shelf type software, and you built your own custom solution, I don't know a way to get the license key. I've never tried it that way. Most people I've seen that I've helped, they've built their own licensing system, so they're generating their own license keys, so that when the system opens, the people they're selling it to don't have full access, so it's licensed, custom through. Put in your license key and then register this machine. Okay. Making the FileMaker standalone. Yes, I think we're talking about the same thing. If you're talking about making the FileMaker a standalone file, then I was basically assuming you're going to resell it. So yes, making the FileMaker standalone. You can use a runtime, although they're set to be deprecated, or you can sell them as license keys, correct? And you could sell users license keys. I would still think you're going to do something at the file level and not the application level, so that you're building something custom into your file that's standalone. We are down to the last couple minutes. I just want to thank everyone for coming again. If you'd like any other questions, which just popped in, sorry. Oh, the server machine standalone. Yeah, it could be standalone if you're using security groups within the server machine. That's correct. So as I mentioned, all of the video and the slides will get posted. The checklist will get posted. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to us at the FM Academy. That's what everything will get posted. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.